Hey guys, it's William again. Literally just 25 seconds ago, I turned off the camera and turned it back on again after finishing my best of the year list. And I hate to be Jacob Tutu, who says two things not at once, but again. I already filmed this video basically, and it turned out blurry. Even though I loved how it turned out audio-wise, I knew that I had to redo it. It was quite a hassle for me. I was down in the dumps for a while, but anyway, I feel okay now with being able to talk to you again about it. So, an obvious disclaimer is not all of these books came out in 2017. In fact, only 2 of the 10 came out in 2017. These are just books I read this year. And also, you're free to hate me if you want, if I dislike a book that you love. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean that it's a bad book. And just every booktuber will say this, or every proper booktuber anyway, but if you like any of these books, then that's amazing, and I encourage you to share with everyone why you like them. And also, there might be some elements in these books that I think are bad, but you think are good. That's what constructive criticism is for. And you never really know until you pick it up. No critic is going to be able to tell you how much you'll love a book. And also, if you decide that what I tell you about sounds good for your reading taste, then go right ahead. Okay, so without further ado, let's start with some dishonorable mentions. And I can tell that you might just click to another video immediately, because the first one I have is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I'm sorry, I just didn't like it. And next is Ruin and Rising, also by Leigh Bardugo. The Countdown by Kimberly Durting, Faded by Alison Noel, and Cruel Beauty by Rosamund Hodge. Okay, so with that, let's let the top 10 commence. Number 10. So starting off the list is Folding Up the Universe by Jennifer Niven. You know, this book was really out of the norm for me. I don't usually read standalone books situated in school, and especially ones that are focused on romance. And I knew automatically that it would, especially considering the fact that it has 2 main characters, Libby and Jack, and they both have these personal problems that they're fighting with. But these personal problems are a genius combination. Libby used to be known as the world's fattest teen in America, and Jack has a strange disease called prosopagnosia that prevents him from recognizing people's faces. That would be a major pain for either of those. And I did find it kind of sweet that they were able to find the best in each other. But basically, I've gone through high school, so even though I wrote a book called The Blacktop Brothers that is situated in high school, I guess that afterwards, it might be harder than you think to do a school book and make it compelling for me, because I've lived through it myself. And so I think the reason that it's on the list is because it takes too long to get going, and I can see a lot of people just putting this book down because it seems like too much hard work. It gets better as it goes along, but yeah, I can't imagine myself ever reading this book again. Number 9. And coming in at number 9 is Dreams of Gods and Monsters by Laini Taylor. I didn't want this to be on my worst list. I may have hated Daughter of Smoke and Bones so much that it was number 2 on my worst list last year, but Days of Blood and Starlight, in my opinion, really improved it. And I was actually liking Dreams of Gods and Monsters at first. I guess the problem that I always had with this series was too many characters with weird names, and also a little bit too much purple prose. Way too much descriptions about everything, so that as a result, the stakes don't seem so high. It feels more like a poetry class. It's a little hard to really feel the pain and misery when everything else from the trees to the walls are being described around them, without focusing on the actual torture. Basically, Dreams of Gods and Monsters had a lot to live up to, it being the final book. And let me put it this way. Several years ago, way back before I was even a blogger, I read a book that had basically a 100-page start and a 100-page end that were just all filler. And Dreams of Gods and Monsters had the most filler ending I think I've ever read since then. It was just so lackluster, and also by page 300 out of 600, we're introduced to a new character called Scarab, or he might be a new character. Maybe I wasn't paying attention in the earlier installments to tell, but we get an 8-page description of him, but then I thought, we're in the middle of a war, that you're stalling. I bet half of these pages didn't even have to be in here for everything that goes on. And the fact that it's the conclusion it really didn't stick well with me. Most people like Laini Taylor's writing style, and most people love this trilogy, but I do not. It's a shame, really, because the covers are to die for. They're some of the most gorgeous in the world. And I also wish that they focused more on, well, the wish aspect. It's not really mentioned at all in Days of Blood and Starlight, and it's only mentioned like near the ending of Dreams of Gods and Monsters, even though it had so much potential to be correlated with the war. All the descriptions that I wanted to read about, like, they weren't really there.
Number 8.
So taking the number 8 spot is Frostblood by Ellie Blake. Like, I felt bad about disliking this book as well, because the author is from Canada just like me, and it was, in a way, kind of similar to Victoria Aveyard's Red Queen, a series that I love. But just sadly, it didn't click for me. At first, we get basically a flashback back to 5 months before this main character, Ruby Atrera, is sent to prison, but there's no real description of what it was like for those 5 months in prison. I really wish there was more. And when she's escorted out by a guy named Arcus, one thing Ellie Blake says is that Ruby was very cold, but she felt a lot better with Arcus by her side. Like, I thought, no, you just met and Arcus seems very, well, anemic. And also, I didn't like the training that happens at first as well. It reminded me too much of Cherub, one of my least favorite series, in that both of the main characters have to apologize for something that isn't really his or her, in this case's fault. And Ruby just feels bad about stuff that happened even though she has nothing to feel sorry for, and I basically said the same thing in that too. But by like page 193, aka the second half, it gets a lot better. It's like it changes from a 1 out of 4 book to a 2 out of 4 book. And one thing Frostblood does very good is make Ruby seem like literally cold. Like, she's shivering. My hands are cold right now, come to think of it. Like, think of like having a bucket of ice dropped on you, and think of that like 5 times colder. And Ellie Blake did a good job with that, but other than that, just, I'm sorry, Frostblood I wasn't a fan of this. It was just too derivative.
Number 7.
And now coming in at number 7 is Sally Green's debut, Halfback. Like, I was expecting a lot more from this book, and yet a lot less at the same time. It seems like too much and too little at the same time. For starters, for everything that goes on in this book, if I had written it, it would have been like 600 pages, but for Sally Green, it's like 400. It's sort of like the polar opposite of Dreams of Gods and Monsters. So much happens with such little writing, and we get to see a boy that we feel really sorry for, Nathan, go through years and years of abuse. And yet, when he is able to finally escape around the half point of the book, it seemed too easy. And then we cut back to about 10 days later after his escape, and there's no detail about how he felt about finally being free, but which was unrealistic. Like, for instance, I'm a big fan of the Escape from Furnace series, and those books were genius in showing how terrifying being locked up is, and how terrifying it is when you have finally escaped. But with Half-Bad, there was none of that. Even though we do get some characters that we actually grow to really like, including a girl named Celia that I thought we would just hate but has a bit more development. And we also get Gabriel and Annalise, even Mercury. Like, we get some characters other than Nathan that we really root for. But basically, it was easy to put down after a while. I cared about Nathan just like in An Ember in the Ashes because of the cruel world, but I felt more like if he gets caught, then the book will be ruined, not him, because the first half is just way too slow, and in the end, it promised a lot more fantasy than it showed. Like, it says that apparently if you're a witch, then and you get your gift, then you get to do all these special things. I didn't really get to see them in anyone, really. So, shame.
Number 6.
And now coming in at number 6 is Wayfarer by Alexandra Bracken. And this was probably like the most disappointing book of the year because I loved Passenger so much that it's in my top 10 best video. But here's why I didn't really like it. The end of Passenger was supreme. Like, Etta and Nicholas get separated via different timelines, and well, they have to try to find a way back. You see, what I was hoping to get in Wayfarer was the astrolabe was found by one of them, and they have to protect it from these people that are chasing them. They still get chased, but in Passenger, it was basically them going through timelines to find the astrolabe. And I wanted something different in Wayfarer. But in Wayfarer, it's pretty much the same plot, except Etta and Nicholas aren't in the same timeline. And I didn't really like that. I felt like I was reading the same thing, only with the main characters apart from each other, and which didn't help. And it was 537 pages. I sped through Passenger in like 2 days. This book took 2 weeks to read. It's such a shame.
Number 5.
Now taking the number 5 spot is Reawakened by Colleen Houck. I read this book because I felt like I needed to give her another chance after I read and hated her previous series starter, Tiger's Curse. But really, Reawakened had pretty much the same sort of plot points as Tiger's Curse. As in, there was an American girl that met a strange deity, aka a teenage boy from a different period in time, and they have to go to a special country outside of the continent and is growing in poverty, but you wouldn't know that from these books, to try to heal this special curse. Like, I'm really not joking. In Tiger's Curse, it was in India. In Reawakened, it's in Egypt. And really, those are poor countries as far as I know, but they're not really described as properly. I guess that Colleen Houck wanted us to feel like we were on vacation, but I was a little just impatient for a nice little story, and these books are just a little slow and just hard to get through. And it's a shame because Colleen Houck is a nice person. She's read and loved a lot of the books that I've read and loved, and shares her opinions on Goodreads. And admittedly, this is a little bit better than Tiger's Curse. I like the characters a little bit more, and and the way it ended was a little bit more compelling. So I might read the next book, Recreated, but we'll see. For now, Reawakened had to get on this list.
Number 4.
Okay, and taking the number 4 spot is Going Over by Beth Kephart. I originally picked up this book because it looked like a book about an escape from the Berlin Wall. And back in grade 9, I read a book, it was basically a top 10 manual about the top 10 most daring escapes, and the escapes from the Berlin Wall was on it. Like being able to escape through a sewer the German government forgot about, like dropping through parachutes and blimps, and daring to climb it through windows. Like, these people really did whatever they could to get to the other side of the wall. But this book it's not really about escapes at all. It manages to have some cases that are very heartbreaking, that are just mentioned. Like, about how a 6-year-old was once looking for his ball, and a guard thought that he was trying to escape through the other side, and he was shot, just like that. Like, that's the sort of story where I wish we were talking about more than this one. Like, the characters are instantly forgettable, and the final escape is just over in the snap of a finger, without much description on afterward, if any, I think. And sorry about if I spoiled the whole thing, but just Going Over was also one of the most disappointing books of the year.
Number 3.
So taking the number 3 spot is I Am the Weapon, or Boy Nobody by Alan Zadoff. Back in 2015, I read a book called Dueled by Elsie Chapman and hated it, and it had pretty similar reasons. For starters, it's about a boy who just calls himself Boy Nobody, who has no family and is a part of an assassination corporation that asks you to get close to a person so that you can assassinate like either them or their relatives. But right away I saw a speeding ticket because Boy Nobody starts off being with a friend that I really thought made a real friendship. And his father was killed, and he's disappeared, and he has no feelings about this. So then I thought, that's a speeding ticket. Hold on, you have to make him a sympathetic character, and after all that happened, I don't see how there's any way that he will be. So immediately I rooted against him, and the book doesn't get any better as it goes along. Boy Nobody just seemed too perfect, and its ending was distasteful, if you ask me. And I was just glad that I was able to get it out of my hair by the end.
Number 2.
And now we're coming down to some 0 out of 4 territory. These two books I thought, okay, you're number 2 and you're number 1. And ironically, for both number ones, I read them first, so maybe that has something to do with it. But anyway, number 2 goes to Fallen by Lauren Kate. I originally read this book because Lauren Kate gave praise to Tahereh Mafi's Shatter Me, a book that had gotten a little bit of hate on Goodreads, whereas her book Fallen got a lot of hate on Goodreads as well. She said, "I'm envious about Shatter Me," and I thought, that was really daring for you to sell your book like that. So I thought, I'll give it a shot, because I did like Shatter Me. But no, Fallen is, I got frustrated immediately. For instance, this girl named Lucinda Price is sent to a reform school called Sword and Cross, and her phone is confiscated, where she's only allowed to talk to her family, or actually one family member, if they even show up, once a week for 15 minutes. And I thought, that's a corrupt education system. And when Luce finally gets to talk to her mom asks her why she hasn't been responding to her texts and messages. And what I would have done is just let Luce explain why not, so that maybe her mother could force the school board to give it back. Because there was nothing in the book saying that she couldn't do that she couldn't say something like that. But instead, Luce resorts to talking about guys. And this is one of the worst examples of a romance I've ever read. She just thinks about this one boy named Daniel about 3 times every chapter, despite the fact that he shrugs her off and is pretty much just an asshole to her. And at the same time, there's a boy that gives Luce affection, attention, and smiles. You can tell that Luce is really happy being around this boy. And if I had a crush on someone and they shooed me off, then eventually the sight of him or her would just make me feel sick. I don't know if that's the same for you, but there's a story behind all of the romance. But I really didn't care about it at all, because it kept going back to thinking about this jerk Daniel, and just I was glad when it ended. But there's one other book that I read this year that was just so intolerable. Fallen was 452 pages, this book was 300 pages, and it was even tougher to get through.
Number 1.
And that would be The Infinite Sea by Rick Yancey. And I wasn't expecting this to be on my worst list, let alone a 0. There's not a single book I've ever read that I expect would get as bad a grade as The Infinite Sea. But, well, it's the sequel to The Fifth Wave, and I didn't like The Fifth Wave. I gave it 1.5 out of 4, originally 2 out of 4, but had to descend it because it was just hard to get through and just bland. And a very boring zombie apocalypse where everything that we were being told about, I wish that we could have been talking about something else. But in The Infinite Sea, I was kind of excited for it because it's 160 pages shorter, and something about The Fifth Wave was it felt too long, so this one could be shorter. And also, a ton of kids end up kidnapped to this place called Wonderland by the others. And I was excited to see how Cassie and Ringer and Ben and Evan would be able to find a way to solve it and get to Wonderland. But they don't even mention it during this book. And also, there's a girl who's sort of killed off, sort of not. But we think that she's killed off, and I thought, I wish that happened at the end of The Fifth Wave, not the beginning of this book. That would have set up more flavor for the cliffhanger. But these characters, they don't do anything. They just sit around just talking about stuff that's just distracting them and us from the real plot. This book is 85 chapters despite being 300 pages, and each time a chapter ended, it felt like an invitation to just stop. And also during the final third act, we get more detail into a side character, and I kind of like this side character, but it took the main character, which I was the most interested in, completely out of the story. And it was a clunker that took me so long to read, and The Infinite Sea is, I felt that the only reason it was published was because The Fifth Wave was such a hit. If the Fifth Wave movie series doesn't get a sequel, then maybe this book is why. And I loved the Fifth Wave movie adaptation. So that's it. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy this video. I hope you don't hate me too much, and I'll be working on my best movies of the year list in the upcoming days, so I'll see you soon. Bye.